My name is Brent Tarter. I'm in the Library of Virginia in Richmond. The Library of Virginia serves as the research library at the seat of government and also as the repository of the state archives. In that respect, the library serves the people of Virginia in the same way that the Library of Congress and the National Archives serve the people of the United States. Among the more than 100 million archival items that the library preserves, there's a small batch in a collection called legislative petitions, and we refer to that small batch as religious petitions. These are documents that Virginians sent to the General Assembly of Virginia between 1776 and 1786 on the subject of church-state relations and religious freedom. These are extraordinarily important documents that illuminate an extraordinarily important episode in Virginia's Revolutionary period history. Until 1786, the Church of England was part of the government of Virginia, and the government of Virginia was part of the Church of England. The Church of England was the established church. By law, every person was a member of the church. By law, every person who paid taxes to support the ministers and the responsibilities of the church. The Church of England had responsibilities that we now regard as civil rather than religious responsibilities. The parishes of the Church of England took care of orphans and of the destitute. The Church of England at one time even took care of the public roads. The Church of England parishes in Virginia were very important parts of the government, insomuch that during the latter part of the colonial period, parishes often imposed higher taxes on the residents than the county governments imposed in order to build jails and courthouses and enforce the law. The Church of England was extremely important. The law required that if you were to be married, you had to be married by a minister of the Church of England. You could not be legally married by a Presbyterian minister or a Baptist minister or a Methodist minister. Now, these privileges of the Church of England, especially the tax policies and the marriage laws, were very much a grievance at the time the Revolution began, because there was a very large increase in Virginia during that time of Presbyterians and Baptists and Methodists, especially Baptists. They were a rapidly growing denomination in Virginia, and almost immediately after the Revolution began, they began to mobilize to break the relationship between church and state in Virginia. They seized on language in the Virginia Declaration of Rights of June 1776 that for the first time affirmed that people had a right to full religious liberty. People petitioned the General Assembly to make that a reality, to break the connection between church and state, to stop requiring everybody to pay taxes to support one denomination, and to create what we now think of as the basic American freedom of separation of church and state, so that religious beliefs and practices are entirely an individual matter and not a matter of the business of the government. The government can't intermeddle in the affairs of religion or in the affairs of churches. The General Assembly passed the Act for Establishing Religious Freedom in January 1786, 10 years after the American Revolution began. During that 10-year period, Baptists and other groups, particularly Presbyterians, petitioned the General Assembly to change that very, very important aspect of Virginia law and to break the relationship between the church and the state. They started almost immediately after the adoption of the Declaration of Rights. They organized all over Virginia, particularly in the southern and eastern parts of the state where the Baptists were the most numerous. This was the very first thing that ever happened of this sort in Virginia. Before that time, people petitioned the General Assembly on matters of local or personal interest only. This is the first time you have an organized campaign to persuade the General Assembly to change a matter of public policy of the very first order of importance. Petitions came into the General Assembly from all over Virginia. The most remarkable, and we have an example here of part of it, was a petition that is referred to in the historical literature as the 10,000 man petition, because the number of people who signed it approached 10,000. It came rolled up in a great big bundle and went to the General Assembly to literally show the members of the Assembly how wide the support was for separating church and state and allowing full religious liberty for all Virginians. They succeeded, and in 1786 the General Assembly adopted Thomas Jefferson's statute for religious freedom, which broke the connection between church and state, ceased collecting taxes that supported the Church of England, and refused to allow any denomination to tax any Virginians. Religion, church membership became an entirely voluntary thing. That separation of church and state and the enshrinement in our constitutional principles of the basic beliefs in religious liberty were one of the most important achievements of the American Revolution. We can see how that campaign progressed using the legislative petitions here in the Library of Virginia. You could go online to the Library of Virginia's website and search the legislative petitions and call up individual ones and read them for yourself. These are wonderful documents, great statements of religious liberty, intellectual freedom, and American independence. It shows how people in Virginia made a big difference.